But today we are going to be talking about passwords, password managers, and password checkers and things like that. So we'll see what happens. But with that, we'll check in on comments here at the end. We're going to dive on in so that people that just want to jump on and see the password stuff and don't want to hear the chitter chatter back and forth. I understand that. I'm not a huge fan of chitter chatter back and forth personally watching, although I really enjoy engaging with it. So kind of split the show up that way. So if you want to see what's going on or read and participate in the comments, we'll do it at the very end of the show. So password checkers are garbage. What do you guys think?
I don't trust them.
Salbu does not trust them. All right. So what
I don't even use local password managers because I don't trust them. You are really putting all your eggs in one basket, even if it is locally and you have synchronized everything.
So what we're talking about isn't password managers right here. We're talking about password checkers. Yeah. So this is a website. You go online, you can type your password in, and it'll tell you if it's a secure password.
Yeah, my stance is that as long as you have typed your password in some password checker, then it's no longer secure, no matter what it says.
I'm inclined to agree with that. An offline one obviously would be a little bit safer than an online one, but I'm not sure either one is good. We're going to walk through the simple principles here. Any other comments on password checkers before we get started here?
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Password checkers, I've never used a password checker in my entire life. I don't trust a password checker of a 10 or 15-foot pole.
Okay, very good. And I don't.
I like the idea of a password checker because, it's kind of good to check on the complexity of a password idea that you may have and stuff like that. But of the ones that are available out there, those kind of skeeve me out a little bit, particularly when it's a website, because you don't know what they're collecting because they are collecting something, whether or not they're handing it off to Google or whoever. That part I don't like, but I like the concept of it, but I don't like to what extent they're being developed at.
Yeah. So the article I found today, I found this, I think it was on its Foss article, but I actually went back to read the actual report instead. So that's what we're linking to here, which is linked in the description. This here is really, really good read because it basically tells us that pretty much every one of these password things are garbage because they don't do any solid analysis. They don't take the approach that hackers would do. They can take those into consideration. And so what we're looking at here is a situation where basically people are trusting these password checkers. What do you even need it for? As long as your password is a long random string of characters or multiple words and has a few different components in it, you're a lot safer than if you just type in something that seems okay and then you drop it into here and it says, hey, this is great because it has an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a number, a special key, whatever, things like that. And so this guy decided he's going to go and see how successful these are with a fascinating password here. And so he goes on and looks at some of these tools. And now he says here Google has the answer. I'm not sure why this, I wouldn't take the guy's advice as like, here, one password, things like that. We'll get into that later on in the discussion. But it says, overall, these are some of the big problems we have with passwords. Now, of course, Google's like, we got to get rid of passwords, which is complete garbage. No, we should not get rid of passwords. The pass keys they're trying to do have far, far, far more fundamental problems. Look at Windows using TPM to encrypt the hard drive. Well, all you need to do is do that simple fingerprint bypass authentication we talked about in the weekly news roundup last week. And as long as your board unlocks, your TPM chip attached to that unlocks the drive. It's better to use Lux and have a separate password to unlock the drive because A, you can portably take that drive, and as long as you supply the proper password, you can still access it. And B, if the system is compromised in such a way that allows that TPM chip to kick on, which is very, very possible to do, then it's like your drive's not even encrypted anyway. So it doesn't really matter. The only thing that saves you from is if somebody pulls the drive out of the computer, then they can't take it somewhere else and crack it. But if you have a good solid password with a Lux or some other external passkey system, an external password system, you're far safer than locking it to some device. And then, of course, we're going to secure our Google account with our passkeys. Whoops, I just dropped my phone in the toilet. I'm going to fish it out around the turd, or am I just going to be like, And that's the problem. How do you get your data back should your device actually die? That raises more concerns, as some people, as I was researching some of the passkey stuff, particularly as it relates to the TPM on Windows computers, a lot of people, the Windows computer automatically sets up TPM encryption, but then what happened is they didn't even know it was locked, it was set up, and so they didn't even know to take a backup of the passkey. Of course, if you do set up TPM, you can take a complicated passkey out that you can manually submit on another device. That is a possibility, but most people don't know that exists. They don't know how to do it. Or as the article says here, people are complacent. They don't think anything's going to happen, and they just choose not to. And so people don't know any better. So there's that. So you type in Google, and this guy uses Google. Why Google? Come on, stop using Google, people. Password strength checker, and there's all these things showing up. So he went through the top ones, and he found that pretty much most of them were garbage. And so he goes through, here's like security.org, has big things in here. How secure is my password? So the password he's using is Ministry 2023 ! And the first M is capitalized. So this will pass, and everybody says, so this site says this would take 2 million years to crack this password. This is secure, 2 million years. This guy here, was it Delinea? Man, that password, 11 million years to crack the password. Comprotech, 11 million years to crack it. Password strength, this one says it's very strong. The reality, it took a $650 graphics card 8 seconds to crack.
Wow.
Why? And the reason, as he highlights, is that the online attacks and the way these attacks go, we look at dictionary attacks, and then we're doing some form of heuristic scans. Also, people who are targeting you to breach into your accounts might know other things about you. I cannot tell you how many Christian organizations I've worked with where the password was God is good. And of course, the G has to be capitalized because we're talking about God. All of the O's are zeros, and there might be an exclamation part at the end. Boom! 11 million years to crack. Except if you know the guy's a Christian, that's probably the first thing to do. If somebody's talking about a PIN number, 2411, most common PIN number that's going to be used for a Christian. Why? Because Jeremiah 24:11 is popular. And so we have a lot of these types of things to think about. That's one of the things he's talking about, where if you know something about the person, you have a better idea of guessing what their password is. And so the way these programs work, they don't just roll up from AAA, AAB, AAC, AAD, and then roll up like that to reach the somehow monkeys at the keyboards to find your password. The programs used to crack passwords are more complicated than that, and that they will do different permeations of suggested words. So if you know somebody's attached to a faith, you put in the keywords of that faith, and then you say, likely test these first, and boom, we can crack the password much faster. Here is why this guy says this doesn't work. Okay, so humans like to pick words for passwords, so they pick the word ministry. Since we're forced to have an uppercase character, generally everybody's going to capitalize the first letter. Okay, and then if we're forced to add some numbers, well, we like either putting the year, or we put a date, or you put a kid's date, or something like that. Or you replace zeros for O's. And then finally, if a special character, what's more convenient than an exclamation mark? And so while all of these programs say that this password takes 11 million years to crack, the reality is it takes 8 seconds because it follows a very simple password. So it's complicated enough. It has enough characters. It has the uppercase, the lowercase, the numbers, the special characters, but it still is not a secure password. So recommendations: use MFA. I'm not as big of a fan of as MFA as other people are, but if you do use MFA, make sure it's not tied to one specific device. I prefer the UB keys, and I have 2 of them. You keep 2 UB keys on, or other similar security keys used for one-click MFA. If you're unaware of what one such device is, here is a UB key. You plug it into your USB port, and then you click the button, and then it will give you your full MFA. Everything that allows or supports that, you should be using that. You want to have 2 of them. Both of them are set up on the account. One of them is locked in a safe, and the other is the one you're using. In the event one of them dies or gets lost, you can still log in with the other one, remove the first one from the system, and then buy a new one to replace it. Don't reuse passwords. This is how people get breached, reusing passwords. That is a problem. All right. And if you really want to use a single word, don't let it be predictable. Don't use ministry or God is good. Use something like cheeseburgers if you're, talking about a vegan website or something, or go vegan if you're dealing with meat, stuff like that. It completely confuse people as to what you're doing. And you want to mix things around. Instead of doing your first letter capitalized, because that's what everybody expects, have, your first letter lowercase and then a couple random letters in the middle, and then throw your special characters and your numbers interspersed between the words. And then using multiple words, and we're not talking God is good. We're talking, the elephants, cheeseburgers, and cows or something like that. Winter Soldier activation. That's what you want to do. So he contacted all of these tool maintainers, and lo and behold, none of them had anything because they're just there about clicks. So that's really the thing. So that is, there is some good advice on there. There is some bad advice. Now, the original article on FOSSBots is like, you should be using something like 1Password. So what do we use? Let's get into that. Salbu, you said you do not use password managers at all. What do you do?
So I have a system for how my password is set up. It started with, so I've been following the podcast Security Now, which is hosted by Steve Gibson and Leo Laporte on the Tweet Network. And between 10 and 15 years ago, Steve Gibson came on the live stream on one of the episodes, and he had made a discovery that he was excited about, and he had verified it. That what the password actually is comprised of what the characters are or lack thereof has nothing to do with how secure the password is. It is solely the length of the password which determines its secureness, because computers are really good at solving problems. But the more characters they need to go through in order to crack a password, the harder they have to work. And just adding a single column or a single character to a password doubles its strength for each, and you get, so having a 7-word sentence, an actual normal sentence, is one of the most secure things that you can do as when you're choosing a password. But he recommended at that time to have because you need to remember your passwords. Password managers didn't exist, or wasn't as prominent back then when he talked about it. So he suggested that to make the password out of 2 components. Whereas you have one thing which is the password or the sentence, and then you add another component to the password, another word or another something, which changes between each place that you need to log into. But you have to determine what it is that changes and how you work out what that is. So that is the system I have. So I am having a password, a sentence that I use, with something added to it, which changes. So I actually don't have the same password everywhere. But I remember every single one. I have something like 30 or 40 passwords, and I remember every single one of them.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. And you said you do not trust any even password managers.
No, because for people who really have hard over remembering passwords or have easy to forget them, a password manager is the thing that they should use. But I don't trust them because even though you have backups and so on, something can happen which either corrupts or invalidates the database, or you can lose it in a fire, or something could happen. And
Well,
then
that's why you have multiple copies of your database.
Yeah.
In different places. So, yeah. So you use just nothing in particular, just remembering things complicated. That did remind me, though, using complete sentences. The big problem is if you are an English teacher, like particularly an elementary age English teacher, please do not use the complete sentence C spot run. That is not a good password. All right. C spot run and jump over the fence might be a little bit better, but I still think that that's too easy to crack and not quite as Winter Soldiery. You want Winter Soldiery is what I'm going with if you're going with the long strings. All right.
But I do have a recommendation for those who do want to use passwords and not a full sentence. Because
I have a recommendation. I'll get to that. Ivan, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I used to use one convention myself, and that was like, I don't know, 13 or so years ago, and I had done that for 10, 15 years. But I use my own convention of sorts now, and I've been pretty happy with it. So I've been using, for a backup method, I've been using KeePass XC's generation method as a backup if I can't happen to use the method that I'm using myself. So that's what we got there.
Yeah. So I don't think Ricky's back yet, or are you, Ricky?
No, he's still out.
Okay. So I use KeePass XC. I don't know why I wrote XS in my notes, typo. But KeePass XC, it's a very good, very up-to-date offline password manager that uses a free and open source password standard, which is extremely encrypted. You can lock it with a YubiKey. You can lock it with a complicated password. You can do all these different things. Since it's all offline, you can make a copy of that database. You can store it a few different places to prevent the encryption or the corruption or the loss, things like that. So all of those are good things to use. I think if Dan were here, this is a hard time for Dan to make it on Wednesdays, but if Dan were here, he uses a notebook, I think, which he said before, which is good as long as you lock it up. And that's fairly safe too. Someone would have to physically breach and break in and steal it. And if you do that, you should code it a little bit so it's not like, hey, this is the Google account login, code it with something weird like the crazy evil spy. Well, now they have, at least they've narrowed it down to like 4 companies. It could be, is this Facebook or Microsoft or Google? I don't know. So there's all those different options. But I personally, I like KeePass XC, which is available, for, Mac, Windows, Linux. On Linux, we have AppImage, we have a Flatpak, we have a Snap. We have a PPA for Ubuntu, but it's also in pretty much every major repository. They do not have a specific app for it for a phone. I wish they did. But there are several apps for both Android on the F-Droid system and in the App Store for Apple that are compatible with the database. So that's why I like using that. There is a browser extension, so you don't want to have your passwords stored by your browser, but this extension will allow your browser to communicate with your password database. If you are doing that, make sure I would keep a separate database just for online accounts in the event there's some weird breach here. They don't get any other offline passwords that you might need. So that's what I would recommend to use as well. Of course, what should you not use? very simple. Anything on the internet. Yes, this includes the free and open source Bitwarden. Sorry, not going to trust it. I do not think you should be storing your passwords in a centralized vault on the internet. I don't care if it's free and open source. I don't care if it's proprietary, although proprietary is worse. If it has to be stored online, Bitwarden is going to be the option, but I would look for sites, for options that you don't have to do that. So there's that. Any other final comments on the passwords? Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.